Guests like you sit by the kitchen. My mother said it in front of 200 people, steering me away from the table I'd set with my own hands. The head table is for family that matters, she added, and walked my sister Brynn to the front like a trophy. She had just told a room full of relatives that I didn't count, at a wedding I'd built from the floor up. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I picked up my place card and set it back down, gently, exactly where it belonged, because in about 40 minutes, the woman with the microphone was going to say my name out loud, and my mother was going to learn what my title was. What happened after that card hit the table is the part she still cannot talk about. I'm Diana, 33, and the woman who pushed me toward the kitchen had no idea. The kitchen, the ballroom, and the contract on file all answered to me. Let me take you back to the morning of that wedding before any of them knew. The Ashford Grove was glowing by 10 a.m. that June Saturday in 2026. 200 chairs in white, dressed and tied, centerpieces of cream peonies on every table, a head table along the north window where the light came in soft and gold by 4 o'clock. I knew that light. I had walked that ballroom at every hour for 3 years, learning where the sun fell, where the draft came from, which corner ate sound. My cousin Tessa was getting married there that afternoon, and I had spent 6 weeks making sure every inch of it would hold. I was the director of operations at Ashford Grove. More than that, though almost no one in my family had bothered to learn it, I was a partner in the company that owned it. My name was on the management agreement. The staff carried radios that, by the end of any event, came back to me. When a vendor needed a decision, they found me. When the kitchen ran a problem, it landed on my clipboard. I had built this from a part-time banquet job at 24 when I was sleeping on a friend's couch and counting quarters for the bus. My family did not know any of that. They knew I worked at a venue. That was the whole of it. My mother told people I did weddings, in the tone you would use for someone who folded napkins. That morning, Tessa found me by the cake table, fixing a ribbon that had slipped. "Diana," she said, and she hugged me hard, careful of her hair. "I can't believe it's today. I can't believe you made it look like this." "You made it look like this?" I said. "I just moved the chairs." She laughed, then she got quiet. "My mom invited yours. I'm sorry, I couldn't get out of it." "It's fine," I said. It was not fine, but I had learned a long time ago to keep my face still. What I did not tell Tessa was that I had asked weeks earlier for a small thing. I had asked her mother, my Aunt Renata, to please seat my mother and sister somewhere quiet, not near me, because I would be working and I did not want a scene at someone else's wedding. Renata had said, of course, and then Renata had done the opposite, because Renata wanted my mother happy, and my mother wanted to be seen at the front. That much I would only understand by the end of the day. For now, I straightened the ribbon and went back to my list. I had 41 things on that list, and 40 of them were under control. The 41st was my mother. To understand why my mother could stand in a beautiful room and tell me I belonged by the trash, you have to know one number: 3. There were 3 of us at home growing up, and only 2 ever mattered. My brother Aaron was the son. My sister Brynn was the pretty one, the loud one, the one my mother called her best friend. I was the middle, the quiet one, the one who, my mother liked to say, didn't need much. I heard that phrase my whole childhood, and it took me years to understand it was not a compliment. It was permission. Permission to skip my recitals. Permission to forget my birthday twice. Permission to spend on Brynn's clothes and Aaron's gear what was never spent on me. I learned early that if I wanted something, I had better earn it alone. So I did. I got the job. I got the next job. I got the promotion no one in my family ever asked about. And the quieter my success grew, the more invisible I became. Because invisibility had been my role since I was small, and roles are hard to quit. There was one dinner I never forgot. I was 9. My mother was hosting her book club, the women she wanted to impress, and the dining room was set with the good plates. I came down in my favorite dress because I thought, in the way 9-year-olds think, that I'd be allowed to sit with the grown-ups. My mother looked at me and laughed, that same laugh, and she said in front of all of them, "Oh, honey, no. Guests like you eat in the kitchen." and she steered me out by the shoulder, and the women laughed, and I ate my dinner standing at the counter while the people who mattered ate off the good plates in the next room. Guests like you eat in the kitchen. I was 9 the first time. I was 33 the last. The words barely changed in 24 years. That's how I knew, standing in that ballroom decades later, that the wedding wasn't a one-time cruelty. It was just the oldest sentence in our family, said out loud one more time, to a room that finally heard it for what it was. The last time I tried to tell my mother what I actually did for a living, she cut me off to ask if I could get Brynn a discount on her engagement party. I never finished the sentence. I never tried again. But that morning, standing in the ballroom I helped build, I felt something I had not felt in years. Not anger, steadiness. The room was mine, whether they knew it or not, and there is a kind of peace in standing on ground you own. I did not know yet that by sundown, the whole room would know it too. My mother arrived at noon, 2 hours early, which was the first warning. I was at the service entrance signing for the floral delivery when I heard her voice carry across the lobby. There she is, the help. She said it to Brynn, and she laughed, and Brynn laughed, and a passing waiter glanced at me with the careful blankness of someone who works in service and has heard worse. "Mom," I said, "you're early. Cocktail hour isn't until 4. Oh, we wanted to see the place before it filled up with people. She looked around the lobby, the marble, the chandelier I had argued the owners into restoring, the wall of glass that opened to the gardens, and she sniffed. It's nice, for what it is. Brynn was already filming herself in the mirror. Is this where you mop? She asked, not even looking at me. I felt the old pull, the urge to explain, to lay the truth on the table and watch their faces change. I let it pass. Not yet. There is a difference between defending yourself and choosing your moment, and I had learned the difference the hard way. The ceremony's at 4:30, I said. Your seats are reserved. Renata can show you. Reserved? My mother smiled. Listen to her, like she runs the place. I picked up the clipboard. Enjoy the gardens. They're at their best right now. I walked away before either of them could land another one. My hands were steady. But there is a moment in every story like mine where the person who has been small for 30 years feels the floor shift under their feet. And I felt it then, in the lobby, with my mother's laugh behind me. The floor was shifting. They just couldn't feel it yet. Before I take you into that ballroom, let me say one thing. If you've ever been the family member who built something real and watched your own people treat you like furniture, if you know exactly the laugh I'm describing, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this story reach the people who need it tonight, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I read them. Now let me get back to that lobby because the gardens are where the next thing happened. But to make you understand why my mother's laugh in that lobby landed the way it did, I have to take you back 6 weeks, to the day my aunt walked into my office and hired me without knowing it was me. It was a Tuesday in early May. I was at my desk at the Grove, working through a stack of contracts, when my assistant buzzed me. Diana, your 11 o'clock is here, mother of the bride for the June 14th wedding. I had the file open already, Renata Voss. The name had stopped me cold a week earlier when the booking came through, because Renata Voss is my aunt, and the June 14th wedding was my cousin Tessa's, and somehow my own family had booked my own venue without a single one of them realizing I was the person who ran it. I had a choice that morning. I could have called Renata and told her. I could have said, Aunt Renata, you've booked my building, I'm the director here. Isn't that wonderful? And maybe in a normal family that's what you do. But I knew my family. The second they learned I had something, a title, a building, any kind of power, it would become a thing to use, a discount to demand, a favor to extract, a story to retell wrong. So I made a decision that morning that I'd carry all the way to the wedding. I would do the job. I would make it perfect, and I would let them find out who I was only if the day forced it. Renata came into my office and didn't recognize the building for what it was, and didn't recognize me for what I'd become. Diana, she said, surprised. I didn't know you worked here too. Small world. 2. As if I were a banquet server who happened to be on shift. I let her think it. I shook her hand across my own desk and I said, I'll be looking after Tessa's wedding personally. She heard that as a niece being sweet. It was a director making a promise. She had no idea those were the same sentence. For 6 weeks I built that day. I want you to understand what that means, because my mother thought it meant folding napkins. I sourced peonies from 3 farms because June peonies are temperamental, and I wanted a backup if the first crop browned. I walked Tessa through 4 cake tastings. I rebuilt the floor plan twice when the guest count jumped from 160 to 210. I negotiated the band down and the photographer up, and I personally tested the north window light at 6:15 on 3 separate evenings to make sure the first dance would land in gold. I did all of it without my family knowing, and every time Tessa gushed about the amazing planner at the venue, her own mother nodded along, never once asking the planner's name. It wasn't easy, that build. 2 weeks out, the original florist called and pulled the peony order. A wholesale shortage, she said, nothing she could do. Tessa would have cried if she'd known, so I didn't tell her. I called the 2 backup farms I'd lined up precisely because June peonies are temperamental, drove 90 minutes each way on my 1 day off to inspect the crop myself, and locked in the order from a grower I'd never used before, on faith and a handshake. Tessa walked the aisle under those peonies and never knew how close she'd come to walking under carnations. That's the job. The job is making sure the people you're doing it for never feel the disasters you spent your nights preventing. That's what I am, under the title. I am the person who absorbs the chaos so someone else's day stays beautiful. I'd been doing it for my family my whole life without thanks. The only difference at the Grove was that here it had a name, and a salary, and a contract, and at least the strangers said thank you. Then, 3 weeks out, the seat request happened. And that's the thread that ran straight to the lobby. Tessa called me, embarrassed, on a Thursday night. "My mom invited your mom and Brynn," she said. "I'm so sorry. I tried to keep it small, but my mom said it would cause a war if she left her own sister off the list." I told her it was fine. Then I did the one protective thing I knew how to do. I called Renata directly, and I asked her, plainly, to please seat my mother and sister somewhere away from me. Back of the room, near her own table, anywhere, because I'd be working the event and I did not want a scene at her daughter's wedding. Renata said, "Of course, sweetheart, of course." She said it twice. I marked it done on my list, and I believed her. What I didn't know was that the day I asked Renata to keep my mother away from me, my mother had already asked Renata for the opposite. I learned this later, but I'll tell you now, because it's the seed of everything. My mother had called Renata that same week and said, and I'm quoting what Renata eventually told me, "Put me up front. I'm the bride's aunt. I'm not sitting in the back like a stranger. And for God's sake, don't seat me next to Diana. She'll be running around with the staff all night. It'll be embarrassing. Put her somewhere out of the way. She likes being useful." There it was again. She likes being useful. The phrase that had defined my whole childhood, weaponized one more time, 3 weeks before a wedding, to a sister who would rather avoid a fight than do the right thing. So Renata had 2 requests from 2 sisters that canceled each other out, and she did what she always did with my mother. She gave Carol what Carol wanted. She put my mother up front and she put me by the kitchen, and she told herself it was fine, because surely Diana wouldn't mind. Diana never minded anything. Diana liked being useful. That decision was made 3 weeks before I ever set foot in that lobby. By the time my mother laughed and called me the help, the trap was already built, and every single one of us was walking into it. They just didn't know I'd be the one holding the floor when it sprang. I had a wedding to run, so I left them in the gardens and went to work. For the next 2 hours, I lived on my radio. The string trio needed an outlet moved. The bartender flagged a wine that came in warm. A bridesmaid had a heel snap and I had a sewing kit and a backup pair of flats in my office because I always do. This is what I am good at. Not napkins, not mopping. Running a complicated, expensive, once-in-a-lifetime day so that nothing breaks where the guests can see it. At 3 o'clock, Tessa's coordinator, a sharp woman named Margot who had worked Ashford Grove events for 2 years and knew exactly who I was, caught me in the hall. "Your aunt changed the seating," Margot said. I stopped. "Changed it how?" "She moved your mother and sister to the head table, family table, front of the room, and she put you—" Margot hesitated. "Where?" "Table 14, by the kitchen door." I have heard a lot of insults in my life. That one was almost funny. Because table 14 was the table I always assigned to vendors and the photographer's second shooter. The working table, the one nobody fights for. My own aunt had seated me at the staff table at a wedding I was staffing. "Do you want me to fix it?" Margot asked. "I can move you." One word. For a second, I wanted to say yes. Then something colder and clearer than anger settled over me. "No," I said. "Leave it exactly where Renata put it." Margot studied my face. "You sure?" "I'm sure." I checked my watch. Let it stand, all of it. Because here is what I understood in that hallway, with the music starting up in the ballroom and the guests beginning to file in. If I quietly fixed my own seat, my mother would never know. She would go on believing I belonged by the kitchen. But if I let her seat me there, if I let her stand up in front of everyone and say it out loud, then the truth, when it came, would not be something I claimed. It would be something the whole room watched arrive. Before I sat down, though, Priya found me, the young server who would later say my name in front of my mother's table. She'd seen the seating change and she was upset on my behalf in the fierce, uncomplicated way of someone 22 years old who hasn't yet learned to swallow things. "Ms. Westcott, that's not right," she said, low by the service door. "You run this whole place. They put you at the vendor table. I'll move it myself. Just say the word." I'd hired Priya 8 months earlier when nobody else would give her a first restaurant job. She'd turned into one of my best, and standing there, watching this kid be angry for me when my own family wouldn't be, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel that day, which was gratitude. "Leave it," I told her. "I know it doesn't make sense, but leave it exactly where it is and just stay close tonight. Keep your radio on." I almost smiled. "I have a feeling things are going to get interesting." She didn't understand. But she nodded because she trusted me, and that trust, earned, freely given, from people who actually knew what I did all day, was worth more than every seat at every head table I'd ever been kept from. My family measured worth by who sat in the gold light. The people who worked for me measured it by whether you'd give a scared 22-year-old a chance. I knew which scoreboard I wanted to win. So I went and sat at table 14, by the kitchen door, in the dress I'd chosen weeks ago, and I waited. And then, 20 minutes before the ceremony, everything I'd built almost came apart. My radio crackled. It was Reuben, the caterer, and his voice had the flat tightness I'd learned to dread. "Diana, we've got a problem. The walk-in's reading 51 degrees. It's been climbing for an hour. The proteins are borderline." A walk-in cooler at 51 degrees, 20 minutes before a 200-person wedding, is the kind of sentence that ends careers. If the proteins had warmed past safe, I'd have to pull 200 entrees with no time to replace them, and Tessa's reception would be remembered as the wedding where the food failed. My building, my contract, my name on the document. I left table 14 and went straight to the kitchen, fast in my dress, while the guests filed in for the ceremony none the wiser. The walk-in was warm. The compressor had iced over, a known failure on that unit, one I'd flagged to the owners twice. Standing in that cold, not cold room with a thermometer in my hand, I felt, for one bad minute, the old certainty that I would fail, and everyone would finally have proof I wasn't what I said I was. That's the thing about being the quiet one your whole life. The doubt lives in you even after the evidence is overwhelming. Even with my name on the building, part of me was braced to be the disappointment my family had always cast me as. Then the training took over. I called my maintenance contractor's emergency line and got nothing. I pulled the staff and we moved every protein to the backup reach-ins and the ice baths in under 15 minutes, racing the clock, my dress sleeves pushed up to the elbow. I rechecked every internal temp myself. 3 were borderline. We pulled those 30 plates. That's where the protein count-off came from later. Those 30 pulled plates left us short, and that shortage was the second crisis I'd have to solve mid-reception. One disaster had quietly seeded the next. I made it back to the ballroom with 90 seconds to spare, sleeves down, breathing even, and nobody in that room of 200 people knew how close their dinner had come to disaster, or that the woman who just saved it was the one their host had seated by the trash. But here's what that cold room did to me. Standing in it, certain I was about to fail, I understood something I'd been avoiding for years. I had spent my whole life proving I was capable to people who would never look, and I was tired of it. Whatever happened tonight, I decided, I was done auditioning for a family that had already made up its mind. The walk-in held, my nerve held, and I walked into that ceremony a little more dangerous than I'd been an hour before, because I had finally stopped being afraid of their verdict. The ceremony was beautiful. I want to say that plainly because none of what came later was Tessa's fault, and she deserved a beautiful day. She married a kind man named Owen under an arch of peonies I had helped tie at 7 that morning. When she walked the aisle, half the room cried. I cried a little too at the back by the kitchen where I could slip out if a vendor needed me. During cocktail hour, I did my walkthrough, and that's when I saw the head table up close. The card with my mother's name sat in the best seat by the window. Beside it, Brynn's. The two of them placed in the gold light I'd spent 3 evenings measuring at the table I'd dressed that morning with my own hands. And down at table 14 by the kitchen door, my card in the calligraphy I'd ordered. The whole thing laid out like a sentence. The people who matter, in the light. The one who doesn't, by the trash. A guest stopped me near the bar, an older woman, a friend of Owen's grandmother, and asked if I could find her a chair without armrests. Her hip was bothering her. Of course, I said, and I got her one because that's what I do, and as I carried it across the room, I passed my mother holding court near the head table, telling a cluster of relatives some story, gesturing with her champagne. She didn't see me. To her, I was just the woman carrying a chair, the help. I set the chair down for the woman with the bad hip, and she squeezed my hand and said, "Bless you, you're wonderful." And that was the only thanks I'd get all night from anyone who shared my blood, except she didn't share my blood. She was a stranger. The strangers kept seeing me. My family kept looking right through. There was one more thing during cocktail hour I didn't think much of at the time. As I crossed the room, I caught sight of my brother Aaron, 4 tables back, watching me. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since a holiday where he'd let our mother run me down at the table and said nothing. I hadn't even known he was invited. He didn't come over, but he watched me work the room with an expression I couldn't read, and when our eyes met for a second, he looked away first. I filed it under things to deal with never and kept moving. I didn't know yet that what he was doing was adding it up. The radio, the staff, the way the whole room ran on me, and that in about an hour he'd stand up and say so. I went back to work, and I waited because I could feel it now, the day bending toward the thing it was going to do. You can feel a room before it breaks. I'd felt it 100 times. I just never thought I'd be standing at the center of the break instead of preventing it. It was at the reception that my mother did the thing I will never forget. Cocktail hour ended. The doors opened. 200 people streamed into the ballroom and found their cards, and the noise rose, warm and happy. I was standing near table 14, half working, when my mother spotted me from across the room. She came toward me with Brynn at her shoulder, and she was smiling, and I knew that smile. It was the smile she wore right before she said something cruel and called it honest. "Diana." She put her hand on my arm. "There you are. We were looking for you." "I'm right here, Mom." "Good." She glanced at my place card on table 14, then back at me, and she raised her voice. "Not by accident, never by accident." So the nearest 3 tables could hear. "We were worried you'd try to wander up front, but this is perfect for you, isn't it? Guests like you sit by the kitchen?" The tables near us went quiet. "The head table," she said, turning to look toward the front, where the light was just starting to go gold, "is for family that matters." And she took Brynn by the hand and walked her to the front of the room, to the seat with the good light. And she sat my sister down where I would have sat if I were the kind of daughter who mattered. I stood by the kitchen door with 200 people pretending not to have heard. I did not chase her. I did not raise my voice. I looked down at the place card on table 14, Diana in the calligraphy I had ordered from a vendor I'd used a dozen times, and I picked it up and I set it back down. Gently. Exactly where it was. Then I looked at my watch. 40 minutes to the toasts. That was when a young server named Priya appeared at my elbow with her radio crackling and her eyes wide. "Ms. Westcott," she whispered. "Kitchen needs you. The protein count's off." "Ms. Westcott." said in front of my mother's table, by a girl in uniform, in the tone you use for the person in charge. A few heads turned. My mother, 3 tables away, did not hear it. She was busy being seated by my aunt with great ceremony. But somebody heard it, and that somebody was about to change everything. Let me tell you what was happening in the kitchen, because it matters. The protein count was real. The caterer had plated for 180, and we were at 210, a 30-plate gap that would leave the back tables staring at empty chargers while the front tables ate. The kind of disaster that, at a wedding, people remember for 20 years. Tessa's reception ran out of food. I had 35 minutes to make it not true. So I went into the kitchen, in my dress, and I solved it. The line was in chaos when I walked in. Reuben barking, plates backing up, 2 cooks frozen at a station because they didn't know whether to fire the next course or hold. 30 plates short and the head table already seated. I stepped onto the line and the room reorganized around me because that's what happens when the person who actually runs the place shows up. "Reuben, talk to me," I said. "Oh, we pulled 30 for temp. I can refire, but it's 12 minutes and the front table's already got bread." "We don't have 12 minutes. I did the math standing there. We resequence. Pull the salad course for the back 4 tables. Push it after the entree. They'll never notice. It reads as a chef's choice. That buys us the 12 minutes on the protein. Fire the head table now off the safe batch. Fire the back tables off the refire. Both hit the floor at the same time." I turned to the sous chef. "Pull the staff meal portions, plate them for the gap. Nobody eats tonight but the guests. Go." It moved. The whole line snapped into motion. I stood at the pass and called the courses myself, plate by plate, because when a service is this close to failing, the person in charge counts every dish out the door with their own eyes. This is the part nobody at table 1 ever sees. This is the part my mother was sneering at when she said the help. The woman she'd sent to the kitchen was, at that exact moment in the kitchen, saving the dinner that the people who mattered were about to eat. While I was working, the kitchen doors swung and a woman came in who did not belong there. Older, elegant, silver-haired, in a dove-gray dress. It was Aunt Renata, the bride's mother, my mother's sister, the one who had moved my seat to the kitchen. "Diana," she said. She looked around at the kitchen, at the radios, at the staff who straightened when I spoke, at me in my dress directing a line of cooks during her daughter's wedding. Something moved across her face. "What are you doing back here?" "My job," I said, not unkindly. I didn't have time for unkind. "Course 3 goes in 4 minutes. Excuse me." "Your job." She said it slowly. "The waiter called you Ms. Westcott." "That's my name." He said it like... She stopped. She was looking at the laminated event sheet clipped to the pass, the one with the header. Ashford Grove, Event Operations, D. Westcott Director. Her eyes went to it, then to me, then to the staff, then back to me. "Renata," I said. "I have a room of 200 people who need to eat at the same time. Can this wait?" "You run this place," she said. It was not a question. I didn't answer. I gave the signal. The line moved. Course 3 went out to 200 plates in one wave, the way it's supposed to. And nobody at the back tables ever knew how close it came. My aunt stood in the corner of the kitchen the whole time, watching me work, with a look on her face I would spend the next hour trying to read. When the last plate cleared the pass, she said very quietly, "I moved your seat." "I know," I said. "Your mother asked me to. She said you'd want to be near the kitchen anyway. She said—" Renata swallowed. "She said you liked being useful." "Did she?" I didn't know any of this was yours." She gestured at the kitchen, the room beyond, the whole glowing building. "I'm so sorry, Diana. I'm so—" "Renata," I wiped my hands. "It's your daughter's wedding. Go be her mother. We'll talk after." She went. But she stopped at the door and she turned back, and the look on her face had hardened into something I hadn't expected. Not guilt anymore. Something closer to resolve. "Carol's about to give a toast," she said. "My mother's name is Carol." She put herself on the list, as the bride's aunt. I felt my stomach drop, but not for the reason you'd think. "She's going to talk about family," Renata said. "She's going to talk about who matters." She paused. "I don't think I'm going to let her finish." And she walked out toward the ballroom, leaving me standing in the kitchen with a towel in my hands and the first real flicker of fear in my chest, because I had spent the whole day deciding to stay quiet And I had just realized I might not be the one who broke the silence. I need you to picture the room now. 200 guests, fed, warm, a little tipsy on good champagne. The light through the north window had gone full gold. Tessa and Owen at the center of the head table, glowing. My mother seated up front, my sister beside her, both of them exactly where they had wanted to be their whole lives. At the front, in the light, where family that matters sits. And me, walking back into the ballroom from the kitchen, in my dress, heading for table 14 by the door. I did not get there. The DJ handed Renata the microphone for the toasts, and Renata, instead of doing the warm mother of the bride speech everyone expected, looked across the room and found me. 200 people followed her gaze to the woman standing by the kitchen door. "Before I thank everyone for coming," Renata said, "I have to fix something, because I did something today I'm ashamed of, and I'm not going to let it stand." The room hushed. My mother's smile froze at the head table. "Earlier today," Renata said, "my sister asked me to move someone to a table by the kitchen. She told me that person liked being useful, that she belonged in the back." Renata's voice was steady, but her hand was not. "So I moved my niece Diana to table 14, the vendor table, at her own family's wedding." A murmur ran through the room. "I want to tell you all who Diana is," Renata said, "because I just found out an hour ago, and I am not going to be the only one who knows. This is the part I want to slow down on, because it's the part that turned. For 30 years, I'd waited for one person in my family to stand up and say I mattered. I had stopped expecting it. I had built a whole life around not needing it. And now my aunt was standing at a microphone in front of 200 people, about to say my name, and I didn't know whether to brace or to breathe. Back to the microphone then, because Renata was about to say it. "Diana Westcott," my aunt said into the microphone, "is the director of operations of this building. The Ashford Grove, the room you're sitting in, the food you just ate." Silence. "She didn't just attend this wedding," Renata went on. "She ran it. The flowers, the timeline, the kitchen, that's hers. When I called this venue 8 months ago to book my daughter's wedding, I had no idea my own niece was the person who would build the whole day. None of us did, because Diana never told us." Renata's voice cracked. "She never told us because we never once asked." I stood by the kitchen door and felt 200 faces turn to me at the same time. At the head table, my mother had gone very still. The gold light was on her face, and she was not smiling anymore. "And 40 minutes ago," Renata said, and now her voice was not shaking at all, "my sister stood up in front of you and told my niece that guests like her sit by the kitchen, that the head table is for family that matters." She looked directly at my mother. "Carol, the woman you sent to the kitchen owns the kitchen. She owns the room, the chair you're sitting in tonight, she put there. Guests like you sit by the kitchen." The oldest sentence in our family, said to a 9-year-old in a favorite dress, said to a 33-year-old in front of 200 people, and now turned all the way around, in a single golden room, into the exact reason everyone in it was looking at my mother and not at me. The words hadn't changed in 24 years. What changed was who they landed on. The room did not gasp. It did something quieter and worse for my mother. It exhaled. 200 people let out a breath at once, and then the whispering started, low and electric, and it did not stop. I had not said a single word. My mother's face moved through a sequence I had never seen on her before. Confusion, disbelief, and then, finally, a flush of red as the truth landed and kept landing, because the worst part for her was not that she'd been cruel. The worst part was that 200 people now knew the cruelty had been pointed at the one person in the building everyone else depended on. She stood up at the head table. Of course she did. My mother could not be quiet to save her life. This is absurd," she said. Her voice was too loud without a microphone, thin in the big room. "Diana works here, that's all. She works here. She's an employee." She found the word and clutched it. "She didn't run anything. Renata, you're making a fool of yourself." And that was the moment the second person spoke. It was Margot, the coordinator, who stepped forward from the side of the room with the easy authority of someone who had run 100 events. She didn't take the mic. She didn't need to. She just spoke into the quiet. I work freelance, Margot said. I've coordinated 19 weddings in this building. Every one of them, my contract was signed by Diana Westcott, Director of Operations. Every timeline I've ever run here, she approved. Every vendor in this room tonight, the florist, the band, the caterer, they were all booked through her office. She looked at my mother, almost gently. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but you just told the boss of this venue to sit by the trash. At a wedding she's been planning for 6 weeks. My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Brynn, beside her, had stopped recording herself. For once. She was staring at me with an expression I had waited 30 years to see. The dawning, sick understanding that she had gotten something fundamentally, publicly wrong. But I want to be honest with you, because this is the part people don't expect. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the floor under me, solid, like it had always been mine, and I felt strangely calm. The thing I had wanted my whole life was happening. The people I came from were finally seeing me, and it did not feel like winning. It felt like the truth finally weighing the right amount in the room. The caterer was the third to speak. His name was Reuben, and he ran the kitchen contract, and he was a big man with flour still on his sleeve because he'd been on the line with me 30 minutes earlier saving the dinner. He didn't wait for permission. He just said it from where he stood near the back in a voice that carried because kitchen voices always do. We were 30 plates short tonight, Reuben said. 30. At the front and the back you'd have had empty plates and a ruined wedding, and nobody would have forgotten it. You want to know why every single one of you ate at the same time tonight? He pointed at me. Because she came into my kitchen in that dress and fixed it. She refired the line. She resequenced 4 courses in her head in about 90 seconds. While she was getting told to sit by the trash, she was in the back making sure your dinner showed up. He shook his head. The boss skipped her own seat to save the meal. That's who you put at table 14. The room turned again, and now they weren't looking at me with curiosity. They were looking at me with something that, in my family, I had never once received in public. Respect. And then, one by one, the room kept turning, because the truth had a way of pulling more of it out of people. A woman at table 6 stood up. I didn't know her. She was a friend of Owen's family. But she introduced herself as the events director at a hotel downtown, a competitor technically. I just want to add something, she said. Our industry is small. Everyone in event operations on this side of the city knows the Ashford Grove turned around in 3 years from a place nobody booked into the best room in the region. We all know who did that. It's not a secret in our world. It was apparently a secret in this family. She sat back down. I'd hire her tomorrow. Most of us would. Then a man I did know stood up and my chest tightened because it was my brother Aaron. Aaron, the golden son, who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years, who had been seated 4 tables back and who I hadn't even realized was coming. He stood up slowly like the words cost him. I'm her brother, Aaron said. The room went quiet for him. I grew up in the same house. And I'm ashamed to say I grew up believing the same thing everybody else in our family believed. That Diana was just the quiet one, the one who didn't need anything. His voice caught. I let my mother say that about my own sister my whole life, and I never once corrected it, because correcting our mother is exhausting, and I was a coward about it. He looked at me. Diana, I'm sorry. You built something incredible, and I was too busy being the favorite to even ask. I had waited 30 years to hear my brother say a true thing in a room full of people. I did not cry, but it was close. My mother sat back down. Slowly, like the air had gone out of her. Pause here, because we're at the moment everything tips. My mother has lost the room, but she hasn't said her last word yet. People like her never do. What do you think she does next? Does she apologize? Does she double down? Does she walk out? Drop your prediction in the comments before I tell you, because most people guess wrong about which way she breaks. Now, let me show you what she actually did. And here is the thing about people like my mother. When they are caught, they do not apologize. They reach for a weapon. So she found one. Well, my mother said, loud, brittle, scanning the room for an ally and finding none. Isn't that nice for Diana? The big career, the fancy title. You know what she doesn't have? She was talking faster now, the way she did when she was losing. A husband, A family of her own, 33 and married to a building. She laughed, but it was alone, and a laugh that lands alone in a silent room is the saddest sound there is. So forgive me if I think the head table is for people who built something that matters, a real family, not a— Carol. It was Renata, sharp into the microphone. Stop. But my mother didn't stop. People like my mother never stop on their own. They have to be stopped. Mom, Brynn said, and that was the one that did it. Because Brynn, my pretty loud sister who had laughed in the lobby and asked if this was where I mopped, Brynn put her hand on my mother's arm and said, quietly, in front of everyone, Mom, you need to stop. Look around. You're the only one talking. My mother looked around. She was the only one talking. 200 people and not one face on her side. Not Renata, not the bride, not the groom, not Brynn, not the staff who had heard her call them the help and now stood watching with their arms crossed. Not a single ally in a room she had walked into 2 hours early to be seen in. For the first time in my entire life, I watched my mother realize she had lost the room. I still hadn't said a word, so I decided it was time to say one. I walked from the kitchen door toward the front of the room. 200 people watched me cross the floor I had measured 100 times. I knew exactly how many steps it was. I'd walked it at every hour of the day. I stopped beside the head table, near Tessa, and I looked at my mother, and I kept my voice low and even, the calm I had learned in 1,000 crises, the calm that carries further than a shout in a quiet room. Mom, I said, I'm not going to fight with you at Tessa's wedding. This is her day, and she deserves a beautiful one, and I spent 6 weeks making sure she'd have it. I turned to Tessa. I'm sorry this happened in front of you. It won't happen again. The rest of the night is yours. Tessa, who had said nothing this whole time because it was her wedding and she'd been frozen, reached out and took my hand and held it on the white tablecloth in front of everyone. Diana made today, Tessa said to the room in the small, clear voice of a bride who has decided what kind of family she's going to keep. She made all of it, and she's sitting up here with me for the rest of the night. Somebody bring her a chair. A server brought a chair. Of course one did. They worked for me. They set it at the head table in the gold light, and I sat down in it. Not because my mother let me, not because I demanded it, but because the bride asked and the room agreed and the truth had finally arranged the seating the way it should have been all along. My mother stood at the head table with no seat anyone would offer her, and she did the only thing left to a person who has run out of weapons. She gathered her purse and she said to no one, I don't have to sit here and be humiliated. And she walked out of the ballroom she had walked into 2 hours early to be seen in. For a moment after the doors swung shut behind her, the room just held its breath. Then Renata lifted the microphone again and her voice had gone warm and she said, Now, let's get back to the reason we're actually here. And she turned to Tessa and Owen and gave the toast she'd meant to give all along. About love and patience and choosing the family that chooses you back. People laughed. People cried the good kind of tears. The night folded itself back together around the bride, the way a good night does, and the ugliness my mother had brought into the room left with her. I sat in the chair the bride had ordered for me in the gold light, and I watched 200 people decide without a word that I belonged there. Nobody made a speech about it. They just included me. A cousin refilled my glass. The woman with the bad hip raised hers to me across the room. It was the smallest thing, and it undid something 30 years in the making. Brynn did not go with her. That was the part I hadn't expected. Brynn stayed. She stayed, and she sat through the rest of the toasts, and at one point she looked down the table at me with red eyes and mouthed, I'm sorry, and I nodded, because some things you accept before you forgive them, and forgiving comes later, if it comes. If you've ever sat at the wrong table at your own family's table, if you've ever had to let a room full of strangers see your worth before your own blood would, I want you to hear me. You are not too much. You were never too much. You were exactly enough, and the wrong people were doing the measuring. Tell me below if you've ever had to set a boundary with a parent who never saw you. I'll be reading. The rest of Tessa's wedding was, by every measure, perfect. The band played. The cake, 3 tiers of lemon and cream, which I had tasted 4 times to get right, came out flawless. Tessa and Owen had their first dance in the gold light by the north window, and the light hit exactly the way I knew it would at 6:15 because I had stood in that spot at 6:15 on a dozen empty evenings to make sure. I sat at the head table and did my job from there, eyes moving over the room, radio quiet on my lap. A few relatives I barely knew came up to me during dessert. An uncle I hadn't spoken to in 10 years crouched by my chair and said, "I had no idea, Diana. I'm sorry I never asked." Cousins I'd grown up being invisible to wanted to know how long I'd run the place, how I'd gotten started, whether I could do a corporate event in the fall. For one night, in the building I had built my life inside, I was the most interesting person in my family. I won't lie to you and tell you that fixed 30 years. It didn't. You don't undo a childhood of being the one who didn't need much in a single golden evening. But something settled in me that night that had been loose and aching for a very long time. I had stopped needing them to see me, and the moment I stopped needing it was somehow the moment it finally happened. Around 9, when the dancing was loud and the night had its own momentum and didn't need me anymore, I stepped out into the gardens for air. Renata was already out there, sitting on a low stone wall, holding her shoes in her hand. "Diana," she said. She patted the wall. I sat. For a while, neither of us said anything. The music came faint through the glass. "I should have asked," Renata said finally. "When you called and asked me to seat them away from you, you were trying to prevent exactly what happened, weren't you? And I did the opposite, because Carol pushed, and Carol always pushes, and it's just easier to give her what she wants than to fight her. I've been doing that my whole life." She looked at her shoes. "I think I did to you tonight the thing everyone's done to you forever. I treated your quiet like it meant you didn't mind." "I minded," I said. "I know that now." She turned to look at me. "She's my sister, and I love her, and she is the most exhausting person I have ever known. But what she said to you tonight, that was cruel. And it was cruel on purpose, and I'm done covering for it." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You built something real, Diana. I'm sorry it took 200 witnesses for this family to notice." I let her hold my hand. It was more than my mother had ever offered from the wrong sister, on the right night. "Why'd you do it?" I asked. "Take the mic. You could have just quietly moved my seat." Renata smiled, a little sad, a little fierce. "Because quiet is how she gets away with it. You've been quiet your whole life, and she's read it as permission your whole life. Somebody had to be loud." She stood and put her shoes back on, one hand on my shoulder for balance. "I figured the least I could do was be loud once for you." Then she went back inside to her daughter's wedding, and I sat in the garden a while longer in the dark, and I felt, for the first time in as long as I could remember, like I was sitting exactly where I belonged. My mother called me 11 times the next day. I did not answer, not out of cruelty. I just didn't have anything to say yet, and I had learned, finally, that I was allowed to take the time I needed before I gave a person my attention. That was new. That was a muscle I had never been allowed to use. The texts came too. They moved through the predictable stages. First, indignation. "How dare Renata embarrass me? How dare you let her?" Then the rewriting. "I was only joking about the kitchen. You've always been so sensitive. You took it the wrong way." Then, when neither worked, the part that was almost the truth. "Everyone is talking about it. Do you know how this makes me look?" That was the line that told me everything. Not "How does this make you feel, Diana?" "How does this make me look?" I put the phone down. 4 days later, she came to the Grove. I was at the front desk going over a fall booking when the doors opened and my mother walked into the lobby she had called nice for what it is. She'd dressed for it, her good coat, her hair done, and she stood under the chandelier I'd restored and looked around like she was seeing it for the first time, which I suppose she was, because she'd never bothered to look the first time. "Diana," she said, "we need to talk." I took her into the small conference room off the lobby and closed the door because whatever was about to happen, I wasn't going to let it happen in front of my staff. She didn't sit. She stood by the window with her arms crossed, and she started the way she always started, with the version where she was the wronged one. You let Renata humiliate me in front of the whole family, she said. You sat there and you let her do it. Do you have any idea what people are saying? Your Aunt Patricia called me. My own bridge group. I can't show my face. Mom, I said. You told me to sit by the kitchen, in front of 200 people. I didn't make you do that. I was joking. You weren't joking. You asked Renata 3 weeks ago to put me out of the way. I have the seating request. You called me the help in the lobby. You stood up at the head table and said family that matters. I kept my voice even. None of that was a joke. You meant every word, and the only thing that's changed is that this time, the room didn't agree with you. And there it was, the thing people like my mother do when the wronged party version stops working. She dropped it, and the truth came out, ugly and plain, because she couldn't help herself. You think you're so much better than us now, she said, and her voice had gone cold and fast. With your building and your title. You always thought that. Even as a little girl, you looked at me like you were keeping score. She stepped closer. Well, you can have your fancy room, but don't you dare act like you're the victim. I gave you exactly what you needed. If I'd coddled you like I did Brynn, you'd have turned out soft and useless. Everything you have because I never let you get comfortable. You should be thanking me. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and I understood her completely for the first time in my life. She wasn't a cartoon. She wasn't pure cruelty. In her own broken arithmetic, she'd convinced herself that neglect was a gift, that by starving me of attention, she'd forged me, that the daughter she'd sent to the kitchen owed her a thank you for the kitchen. It was the most honest she'd ever been with me, and it was monstrous, and I think she genuinely believed it. You took the scholarship form, I said quietly. When I was 19, Aaron told me. For 1 second, 1 single second, something flickered across my mother's face that might have been shame. It was the only human moment she gave me. Then it was gone, papered over, because she could not survive admitting it. I protected you from a disappointment, she said. You let me carry a failure that was yours for 14 years. I did what a mother does. No, I said, and I stood up and I walked to the door of my own conference room and opened it. You did what you do, and I'm done thanking you for it. I have a building to run. You can see yourself out. You know where the kitchen is. She left. She left the way she'd left the wedding, gathering herself up and announcing her own dignity on the way out the door because no one else would announce it for her. And I stood in the lobby of the place I'd built and watched her go, and I felt the last thread of something that had been pulling on me for 30 years simply let go. I didn't put the phone down on her that day to win. I put it down because for the first time I finally believed I didn't need her to be right about me. Brynn called too, but Brynn called once, and Brynn said something different. I watched you my whole life and I thought you were just quiet, she said. I thought that's all you were. I was awful to you yesterday in the lobby and I've been awful to you forever and I don't really know how to fix it. But I want to, if you'll let me. I don't know yet, I told her honestly. But you stayed. When she walked out, you stayed. That meant something. It's the first decent thing I've done in a while, Brynn said, and she laughed, wet and small. And for the first time in 30 years, it felt like I actually had a sister. We're not fixed. I want to be clear about that because I think people want these stories to end with everyone hugging, and that's not honest, and it's not how it goes. Brynn and I are learning each other now, slowly as adults, from the ground up. It's awkward. It's better than nothing. It might become something good. We'll see. Aaron came to see me at the Grove the following week. He stood in my office the way Renata had stood in my kitchen, looking at the awards on the wall, the framed magazine feature, the floor-to-ceiling glass, like he was meeting a person he'd lived beside his whole life and never met. He sat down across from my desk and he told me something I hadn't known. You remember when you were 19? He said. And you got that scholarship to the hospitality program, the one with the internship attached? I remembered. I'd gotten in. And then, somehow, the paperwork had never gone through, and I'd lost the spot, and I'd always assumed I'd missed a deadline because I was overwhelmed and broke and doing it all alone. You didn't miss the deadline, Aaron said. His jaw was tight. Mom didn't mail the acceptance form. She told me about it years later like it was funny. She said you'd get ideas above your station and end up disappointed, and she was protecting you. She let you think you'd failed. She let you carry that for 14 years. I sat very still. Here is the thing about a wound that old. You think it's healed because you stopped touching it, and then someone tells you the truth about how it got there, and you find out it never closed. It just scarred over wrong. My mother hadn't only failed to see me. At 19, when I'd reached for the exact thing I eventually built anyway, she had reached out quietly and taken it and let me blame myself. I built it anyway, I said finally. It took me 10 extra years and I built the whole thing anyway. Aaron nodded. I know. That's the part I can't get over. He swallowed. She bet her whole life that you'd stay small, and you didn't. You just did it the hard way, alone, while she told everyone you were the one who didn't matter. I didn't rage. I didn't call my mother. What I felt was stranger and quieter than rage. It was the click of a long puzzle finishing, the last piece sliding in. I had spent 14 years believing I'd dropped the one chance handed to me. I'd built my career partly to outrun that shame, and the shame had never been mine to carry. It had been hers, and she'd handed it to me like a coat she didn't want. Why are you telling me now? I asked. Because I watched 200 strangers respect you more in 5 minutes than our family did in 30 years, Aaron said. And I'm done being on the wrong side of that. I should have mailed the form myself, Diana. I should have done a lot of things. He stood up. I'm not asking you to forgive Mom. I'm asking if I can start coming around, as your brother. For real this time. I told him yes, slowly, with conditions. But yes. Before he left, he stopped at the door, the way they all seemed to stop at doors that month, and he said one more thing. I keep thinking about what you'd be if she'd actually backed you, if she'd mailed the form, if she'd shown up to one recital. He shook his head. And then I think, no, this is what you'd be. You did it without her. You did it in spite of her. That's the part she'll never be able to take credit for, no matter how she rewrites it. He almost smiled. She bet against you your whole life, and you're the only one of us who built something that'll outlast her. I just wanted to say it out loud in the building you built, so somebody finally said it where it counts. I think about that more than I expected to. She bet against me, and I built it anyway, not to spite her. I didn't have the energy for spite. I built it because it was mine to build, and the only person whose belief I finally needed was my own. It's been a few weeks now. I'm still the director of operations at the Ashford Grove, still a partner in the company that owns it. Tessa and Owen sent me a photograph from their wedding, not of themselves, but of the head table in the gold light, with an empty chair in it, and on the back, Tessa wrote, "This is the chair you should have started in. Thank you for the most beautiful day of my life." I have it on my desk. There's one more thing I did, and it's small, but it mattered to me. I kept the place card, the one that said Diana in calligraphy, the one from table 14 by the kitchen door. I'd picked it up that night and set it back down to make a point, and at the end of the evening, when the room had cleared and the staff were stacking chairs, I went back and took it. I don't fully know why. Maybe because for one night that little card had been a thing meant to make me small, and I wanted to be the one who decided what it meant instead. It sits on my desk now, propped against the photo Tessa sent of the empty chair in the gold light. Table 14 and the head table side by side on the desk in the building I run. The card that was supposed to keep me in my place and the chair I ended up sitting in anyway. I look at them both some mornings before the day starts, and I don't feel angry anymore. I feel like a person who finally stopped letting other people assign her seat. Brynn came by the Grove last weekend just to see it. She walked the whole building slowly, the ballroom, the gardens, the kitchen, and at the end, she stood in the lobby and said, "I spent my whole life up front in the good light, and I never built a single thing. You spent yours in the back, and you built all of this." She shook her head. I had it exactly backwards. We all did. It's the truest thing my sister has ever said to me. We're still finding our way. But she meant it, and meaning it is where everything starts. My mother and I have not spoken. She is waiting for me to apologize for being embarrassed, and I am no longer in the business of apologizing for things other people did to me. Maybe someday she'll call to ask how I am instead of how she looks. If she does, I'll listen. The door isn't locked. But I'm not going to hold it open forever, and I'm not going to chase her down the hall to make her walk through it. She knows where I am. She always did. She just never thought it was a place that mattered. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. For 30 years, I believed that if I was quiet enough and useful enough and successful enough, my family would finally seat me at the table that mattered. And the night it finally happened, I understood I'd had it backwards the whole time. I didn't need their table. I'd built my own room, and they were guests in it, and they never even knew. If there's someone in your life who has mistaken your silence for permission, your quiet for not minding, your usefulness for not deserving more, I hope tonight is the night you stop waiting for them to seat you, and you walk to the front of the room you built, and you sit down. You don't need anyone to bring you a chair, but somebody will, and it won't be the person you spent your whole life waiting on. Thank you for being here. If this story found someone tonight who needed to hear it, that's enough for me. Take care of yourself. And remember, the table that matters is the one you stop asking permission to sit at.